Okay, so the original number one position is called the original. The original position is not a copy of anything. It's an original that is not a copy of anything, and it sits in the first position, and it's valid in the first position. The only position as a singularity that's valid is in the first position. The second position is not valid as a singularity because it's two. The second position is two positions as of one position, and the first position is one position as one position. The only position of the 12 signs of the zodiac that's a 1 and a 1 is Aries in the first position. And the 2, which is Taurus, is two ones in the second position. It could also be a first, but it's not a first, it's a second, which means that the first is only valid as an original if it's in the first position. Now, if a copy is in the first position, it doesn't make it valid, but it will look valid, and it can claim to be an original. So you could place a copy that came from the second position into the first position and claim it's an original. And then you could argue about it and fight about it since it's intangible. And so if the copy is claiming to be an original and it's in the first position, it'll actually appear to be right unless you could prove it wrong. So there's every reason for much conflict to prove it wrong and much war to prove it right. So the reality is that the only valid ego comes from the first position. It's also the only original, and ego is the original spirit, which was in the first position as Aries, and the only one that is a singularity. So the only one that is an original, and the only valid one is the one itself in the first. So if you take the first and put it into the second place, it's now a one that's in a possible two positions in the second place. And so even if it's a first, it's in the first position of two positions, and it could be in those two positions in the possible first or second place. So a one placed in the second position can be in either one of those positions. And if it's in the first position, it's still not in the second position in the second place. And if it's in the second position in the second place, it's not in the first position in the second place first, which means that you can't move a one that's capable of only being a one into the second place unless you invalidate it. And if you keep a one in the first place, it's claimed to be invalid because it's ego. And ego is the original, which is not a copy. And all copies come from supposed to be copying the ego. But since the ego is not accepted and egos are considered invalid, then what makes the first position actually valid is that it's an original first in the first position. So now it's claimed to be invalid, and since it's in the first position, it's claimed to be invalid in the first position, even though it's actually valid and not invalid in the first position. So now that they don't accept ego anymore, they say it's invalid. So how do you validate ego that's been invalidated? You take it out of the first position, put it into the second position in the second place as a first, and say, now will you validate me since I moved out of the first position? And everyone says, yes, sure, yeah, okay. If you're not going to be a big fat ego in the first position selfishly, get into the second position and share. Okay, I did. Now am I valid? Yes. But truly, no. Meaning, to validate yourself, you'll invalidate yourself. To invalidate yourself, just try to be validated.